Good morning. May the 8th, VE Day, 75th anniversary of victory in Europe, the end of the war there in Europe, World War II. What an important day. I think it's important we stop and we remember the sacrifices so many people made. It's still hard to wrap our minds around what people really did live through. There were such great sacrifices, and yet there were such wonderful acts of love and kindness in the midst of a horrible war. Barbara Jackson was a member of the St. Luke's staff when I came here to St. Luke's 29 years ago. She was a wonderful lady. She originally had been born and raised in England. She met an American GI in the war. They were married, and when the war was over, she moved back home and moved back here to his home in Oklahoma City. They raised their family, and her husband had passed away. She was now still on staff there at St. Luke's. She told me a wonderful story, though, about when she was living through World War II. Her father was a Methodist lay minister, and he ran a small grocery store. People would come and hang out and have something to eat and buy food and share all the local news and gossip with one another. Well, one day she was coming home from school, and they began to hear the sirens. I mean, she had lived through the Blitzkrieg, the bombings, night after night. Now it was an afternoon bombing raid, and they started to run for the shelters. But then they stopped because they heard a dogfight going up in the sky. It was a British Spitfire and a German Messerschmitt. They were dueling up in the sky, and then you begin to see that the German Messerschmitt was pouring out smoke. And then suddenly a pilot bailed out of the plane. The plane would crash, but the pilot was parachuting down. Everybody wanted to run to see if they could get to this pilot. I mean, it was an angry crowd. They were being bombed every night, strafed by these kinds of German pilots. And by the time they got there, it turned out her father was already there. He had pushed through the crowd, and he got to this pilot. And she said, I looked on and I could tell this was probably just a boy, someone maybe 20 years old who was a German fighter pilot. The crowd wanted him, but her father told them all to stand back. He helped him to get out of his parachute, and then he said, come with me. We have a prisoner. The people didn't want a prisoner. They wanted that boy. But her father wouldn't let him have him, and he took him back to his store. The people all followed him back to the store, still clamoring, and her father went to the phone and dialed it up and called in the sheriff's office and said, you need to come over. We have a prisoner. He then went over and he cut a piece of bread, and then a second piece of bread. He got butter and began to put butter on the bread. He put a kettle on the stove and it began to heat up. And then he went over and cut a piece of ham, a thick slice of ham, and made it into a sandwich. Now food was being rationed, and everybody was saying, what are you doing? And he put this cup of tea in front of this pilot, and he gave him this sandwich. This young boy wolfed down that ham sandwich, but he never took his eyes off my father, she said. He just kept looking at him. He didn't want to look around in the crowd and make eye contact with all these angry people who wanted to do him harm. No, he got through eating, and his father looked out at the crowd and said, what do you think Jesus would ask us to do? How did Jesus ask us to treat our enemy? Her father, she said, saw it as an opportunity to preach. He simply asked those questions and kind of let them be hanging in the air and talked about it for a moment when then two sheriffs arrived. They were big, burly guys, more than 6 feet tall. They both had sons fighting in the war. And when they came in, her father said, I want you to take this young man and treat him as you would want your sons treated if they were caught behind enemy lines. He just let it hang in the air. They finally nodded. they took the young man and they started to push through the crowd. When they'd finally gone, the crowd began to disperse. But before they got to the door, the young man actually broke free from the two guards. He ran back over to my father, she said, and he threw his arms around him, and he was sobbing, and he just kept saying, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." They led him away with the last of the crowd. When finally everybody was gone, she said my father sat down at a table and he put his head on his arms and he just began to sob. She said, "I knew why he's crying. He was thinking about my two brothers, his two sons. One was missing in action. The other one had already been captured behind enemy lines." Treat him the way you would want your son treated if he was captured. To live the golden rule, what a difference it would make in the world. Maybe it's a good day for you and I to start. Go out and be safe and have a blessed day as we give thanks.